into my business, in all these different ways that I can do it. For me in the past, when I've had my own business, one of the mistakes that in hindsight I realized I would make when I was in those situations is I tried to bring on new product lines. The thought process for me was, hey, if I have a new product, I can generate new sales and get new customers and get myself out of a cash crunch. And inevitably, that proved to me, and like I said, in hindsight, those were mistakes, because just increasing your sales alone, even through new products or whatever you may do, that's not on your rifled path to your destination, that doesn't fit into the paradigm that you've already set up, that our customers and the products you already sell and the fulfillment agreement that you have established. When you start to deviate from that, and that's what I would try to do, is deviate somewhat from my product offering to pick up new customers and new sales, inevitably the expenses increased, my inventory carrying costs increased, all these other things went right along with it, and I really ended up just treading water and was panicked in a way, trying to make those decisions. So there's all kinds of things that businesses do when they're caught in this survival trap. Take on troublesome clients. Kind of a crude reference is that you prostitute yourself out to anybody and everything out of desperation. I'll sell anything or do anything. And at the end of the day, it just fragments your resources, your attention, and your energy. And it takes you away from B. Anything that's not directly helping you get to your destination is a distraction and pulling you away from that. And so much like what Amanda experienced, we as entrepreneurs and business owners have the same experience when it comes to crisis. Two other big principles that I've been really kind of laying into and thinking about constantly is health reserve. Those of you that know me, me and my wife went on a journey about 6 months ago to get in shape and to get better. I can honestly say that I've never thought of myself as unhealthy. To my surprise, I ended up losing 25 pounds, and I could tell a difference. Other people would tell me I don't look fat anymore, and things like that. So it made a difference. I didn't realize it, and interestingly enough, and I think you probably recognize this concept, Paul, in the financial realm, there's this idea of reserve, having capital reserve or financial reserve. And the doctor that we went and saw around this, Dr. Patterson, it's all about health reserve. And he just reverse engineered kind of the financial principles of having financial reserve and being able to deal with crisis and the margin that you need when something happens. And so I thought about and reflected a lot on the journey we've had me and my wife has had health-wise, and how that relates to business. And you don't even realize how much reserve you need, how much margin you need until you deal with a crisis. And we saw this with my wife. Didn't really even understand maybe what had the phenomenon or what had happened, but about 3 years ago, she came down, and we didn't know this even for almost a month or two later, but she dealt with pneumonia for almost 2 months. And you know, of course, the first time she wakes up and she couldn't breathe, was struggling to catch her breath, and I'm WebMDing it, which again is probably not the best thing, WebMDing it, and I'm like, well, you're either having a stroke or you're, you know, it was some other crazy thing that there was no way that's what it was. But it ended up being pneumonia, and it took her almost 3 months to get over it. That was a crisis in her health that even then we didn't realize the reserve that it took from her triggered an autoimmune problem in her body, and she's ended up having psoriasis and arthritic psoriasis even in her joints. And so that's kind of the principle that I lean into when thinking about even right now what's happening in our country and to small businesses, is the margin that you have as a business and the reserve that you have is going to determine how you come out on the other side of this crisis, how much runway you have, and things like that. Let me jump over here. lost my computer's going to crawl now. So I want to share with you this whole concept in a business as far as reserve and health it's based on like Maslow's hierarchy of needs. This is called the business hierarchy of needs. And it's mapped out much like Maslow's triangle. You have the basics, the fundamental is your base level. And so the creation of cash, that the selling of something and creating income is like oxygen for us as human beings. And without it, without food, water, and oxygen, no other need matters. We can be philosophizing and talking over lunch and eating hamburgers, and all of a sudden, if you start choking on your hamburger and can't catch your breath, it doesn't matter the meaning of life or religion or society or politics. All of a sudden, all that matters is you catching your breath. And that's where a lot of businesses find themselves. But again, that survival trap of going from point A to point B, you want to keep in mind these first three layers of the hierarchy of needs. So it's not just about selling anything and making any kind of money. It's about making money that is profitable for you, because that's going to be the stability of your business. And then the order is not just the systems or the processes in your business, but it's the autonomy. It's taking out the personalities out of your business and making it so that your business is autonomous. So all of the decision making that you have before you to have a sustainable and a healthy business with reserve needs to have those things in consideration. But if you're in crisis, like a lot of us are in now with our businesses and the economy, then you obviously go back to the base levels and start evaluating what needs to be done on those base levels. So this is kind of, and I think about pruning too as another analogy that I've had a lot in my mind lately. When you talk about a business, and the function of pruning in a horticulture setting is it improves the overall structure of the plant, and it helps promote healthy growth. And so there's, it's, if you think of pruning, even in a spiritual sense, in John 15 and 16, when Jesus talks about that, he talks about spiritually pruning. And it's a painful process for the plant or the person that has to go through that pruning. But the end results are that you have, you're going to have a healthier and an improved structure, something that has more reserve and margin. And so right now, there's a lot of businesses that are going through this pruning process even. And I don't know, what's interesting is more and more I've thought about this is it's coincidental, I guess, that what's causing this crisis in the coronavirus is it attacks the lungs. It attacks the ability for people to breathe. And it's also doing the same thing to our businesses. It's starving the velocity of money in the economy and the oxygen that our businesses need to live. So I've just kind of outlined, there's 3 plans that every business needs to have right now, especially if they're having to go back to their basics and figure out how to get oxygen and survive. So this, fight to live. The 3 plans, you just got to focus on your cash flow right now. You want to reduce the expenses. Low to no benefit expenses are the easy things you want to go in and pick off. A really good tip I've heard is you can go to your bank, you can go to your credit card company, and the first thing you can do is just ask them to reissue a new card to you, okay? What that's gonna do is it's gonna stop all the reoccurring and subscription type payments that you're making, and that will force them to send you an email or contact you and say, hey, you need to renew this, your payment's no good because your credit card changed. And it helps you identify maybe what are low to no benefit expenses that you can cut. This needs to be done on the business side and on the personal side. The strategy here is that the business owner needs to survive along with the business. And there's a lot of overlap, especially in smaller businesses, $2 million or less. that connection of the business owner and that business, a lot of these strategies apply to both of them. And so reducing the expenses, reducing the things that are of low benefit or no benefit need to be looked at on both sides of the personal and the business. And then trying to figure out, maximize the inflow of cash. So collections in the business, there are ways to go about maybe offering other payment options. There is a business metrics where you start to cross a threshold of obligation. So early on, when you've borrowed money and you owe it to your the person you borrowed it from, there's more obligation in the beginning. So if you've extended credit to people and they haven't paid down enough that the value of that has crossed the plane, then their obligation to you is greater and they're more sensitive to it. Once their obligation goes down and they feel like, well, I've paid the value of that for the most part, I'm 80% through my payment plan or whatever, then that obligation is turned down a little bit on their side and not a priority to them. And so you've got to be sensitive to who's in the power seat kind of on the obligation side when it comes to your collections and balance that. Looking at your offering, high margin stuff and your clients, that's what you've got to re-examine through this in terms of maximizing your cash flow. So the next plan you want to have is just an overall business plan. Again, this is in the spirit of pruning. You want to reduce the variability in your offering. Again, getting laser focused is more in line and important. Knowing your target customers and your best customers and getting into their mindset right now and being able to speak to them of what's of value. Data is super important. I've seen businesses that don't collect a lot of data about their customers and they don't know their customer mix. So again, in the spirit of pruning, this is a time for you to figure out what you've got to get better at and do better at to help the structure of your business. But collecting data is kind of the stage that you need to be in right now if you don't have good data, and figuring out where to put your focus on to help you navigate. Again, there's a velocity issue of money right now. There is money flowing in the economy. It's just not flowing where it was before. And identifying where it is for you and that you can put value back into those money streams and catch those currents is kind of the business plan that you need to put together. The last thing, getting through this survival phase is just messaging. So I've seen some posts on Facebook and all about people saying, hey, we need your business or I'm going to have to lay off all my employees. And that's really the wrong message you want to send to people. Is charity, is feel sorry for me as the business owner. At the end of the day, you are a for-profit business for the most part. And in those situations, you want to show a message of value. So I've seen other businesses that they state it in a more respectable way of saying, hey, we need your business, we appreciate your business, and we want to bring value to you so we can keep our employees productive and bringing that value to you. So how you phrase that message is really important right now, and more frequent, shorter communications. So, it's overwhelming. I mean, I think 2 weeks ago, every other message in my email box was about COVID-19. And so it kind of wore me down. It kind of turned in kind of a blind eye to it. And I think even Facebook and other platforms are starting to filter people that are trying to be opportunistic with those kinds of messages. So you've got to really cater your message and have a strategy around what you're going to say to your customers, but they need to hear from you. Silence is just as bad as over communicating or sending the pity charity message. So those are 3 plans. Kind of a bigger picture, if we step back and really look at the trends, if you look back at 2008, 2001, and other financial crisis, there's a typical trend that businesses follow. Stage 1 and stage 2 is kind of where we're at still in this trend. There's the shock and the freeze up, not really sure what to happen. and the mistake people make, especially business owners in that stage, is inaction. They just wait. They kind of wait to see what's going to happen, and they freeze up. That's a mistake, and you'll have some attrition, and businesses not make it because of the inaction they take. And then desperation, again, it's back to Amanda Eller in that example of just panic, taking big wrong actions, and it's the run on toilet paper is kind of the example of that. I'm not still sure what that's all about. But where you want to be right now is in the evaluation stage, this stage 3. And that's kind of what I was trying to give you in the previous slide. It's just some actions you can take right now to position yourself and get ready for when things come around. I'm still fairly optimistic that it's going to come around sooner than later. The pent-up demand, I feel like, is going to come back fairly quickly. I think it's a suppression of demand, and I think, again, human productivity is going to win out when all's said and done. We want to, as human beings, be productive and earn our livelihood. And that's where you're preparing as a business owner, is for stage 4 and stage 5. If you can see in this graphic, in action, big wrong actions, small reoccurring wrong actions, even in stage 3, will lead businesses to expiration. So there are businesses that there is going to be attrition, and businesses that fall out of this. And the key strategy right now is just to get through this, to get as much length and runway as you can, to get to stage 4, where you're taking deliberate action and the burst, because when you have the whole economy is being pruned out right now. And so there's efficiencies that have to replace the inefficiencies that are happening. There are the businesses that survive that are going to replace the ones that didn't, because there's still going to be a surge of supply that comes back. And another example, another way I've heard this explained is, and we've seen this in the collision industry, some of the big, large multi-shop operators have announced they're closing 100 to 400 stores across the nation. And the furloughs and the layoffs and everything they're doing to scramble and get a handle on the lack of cash flow that they're experiencing. Well, they're going to lose, let's say they lose 10% of their customers. For them, that may be 1,000 customers in a particular area. If I'm a small collision repair shop and I lost 10% of my customers at the same rate that they are, that may only be 10 customers. So they've lost 100, I've lost 10. When things open back up and the stay-at-homes are lifted and the economy starts going and money starts picking up its velocity again, then I've got to go out and pick up 10 new customers as a small independent shop out of 100 that these guys have lost. So there is opportunity for you, if you weather this and you are the smaller guy, to go out and take advantage of the supply of customers that these other businesses that didn't make it are going to leave. So just a few takeaways from all of this. A lot of the conventional solutions, I think, right now, I approach with some trepidation. And the biggest is just what the government's telling small businesses to do, which is to take out loans. And there's benefit to it. I think it's strategic in how you approach something like these SBA loans and things like that. I wouldn't necessarily say not to do it, but it's why you're doing it, and understanding that when you borrow money, there's got to be a return on that investment. And so there's debt leveraging that you can do, or debt bridging. Debt bridging, as you know, with 99.9% certainty that, you know what, we had a big order. I ran out of the stuff I needed to fulfill it. I've got to go buy a whole new batch of it, which is going to cost me more than what I have coming in. I've got to pay payroll. I've got all these things, but with this new batch of inventory, I'll be able to sell some more in the next 2 weeks. I just got to pay payroll right now, and so I'm going to take out a loan to bridge me over those 2 weeks till I get the inventory turned and the sales done. That's debt bridging. The problem with the government offering loans to help these businesses right now is we don't know with certainty when we're going to be able to repay those things. I like personally the PPP loan just because it has less risk to it for the small business owner. And there is a forgiveness component, but again, caution is there because you have to meet a certain criteria to get that forgiven. So you're still taking on debt. I've never seen a loan program like it, so it's interesting. And I think things are still fluid and changing around it somewhat. I think the banks have had to really do a lot of interpretation day in and day out throughout last week. I saw a lot of different commentaries on it, as it were, but it definitely is something, again, you need to go back to the strategy around your business and if it makes sense to take on that debt. And it is, knowing how much runway you have and act accordingly. So doing a break-even analysis with some profitability built into it, profit first. Certified professional, I'm going to always advocate you want to, factor in at least a 1 to 2% profitability if you can, because that needs to be primary to your business. But knowing how much runway you have, so understanding what's got to happen and come up with contingency plans. If we don't start generating sales at this point, then what is that going to mean? Is it going to be jobs? Is it going to be rent? Things like that. But also going in and negotiating your terms, your leases, things like that. There's a lot of leeway right now and a lot of flexibility if you really are in crisis cash flow wise, that I think lenders and lease companies are willing to work with you. So again, also it's a positive thing to take this time. There's nothing like having some pain to get you laser focused on what's important and what you've got to do right now. And so it is a pruning process across the board, the economy and for us as individuals. And so using this crisis to be better financial stewards and better businesses is really a good opportunity for us. And if you go back to the crisis trend graph that I just showed you, knowing that things are going to turn around, things are going to get better, and the more efficient you can make yourself now and gear up for that, the more improvement long term. I don't know, I can't defend this from a source standpoint, but what I've heard is in the past crises, the 2008, 2001, what they've seen are the businesses that weathered that, they actually had a huge surge in growth in their business coming out of that recession than they probably would have had things stayed the same. So that's the opportunity for those of us that can weather it. And then just follow the money. There were already silos, is the way I've heard this explained, in our economy. You can look at the way the government spends money, where they funnel money to, programs, projects, different entities. And around those communities, for us, you take the Air Force Base and DIAS, that is a financial underpinning to Abilene, and it helps it. And so the more military spending that's done, then that helps the network economy around that silo of money. So thinking about that for us at Professional Collision Equipment, it's an essential business. People aren't wanting to buy necessarily equipment right now, but we do know that there are a lot of fleet still operating, the truckers, those kinds of things. And so looking to see how our products will help meet some of the demand that's going to be out there in terms of fleet customers and those type of people, there is still some money flow there. And so it's identifying that and following it. The other good advice I've heard is use this time to recruit. There are going to be really good employees that are being laid off, and you don't have to hire them right now. You may not be in a position to hire them right now, but you certainly could be recruiting them. And so recruiting people, ramping up your business, and just re-examining to make sure that you're on the right trajectory with that point B. I've got a resource. I shared it in the chat early on. I'll reshare it here in a minute. It's a one-page recession response, and it's got a website too. This is provided by Mike McAllowitz and the Profit First planning group. But this is a one-page resource. This isn't everything on the screen. I've got a shared it in there. I'm going to give it to Mike and have him put it on the Facebook startup community page if you want to get access to it that way. Or you can email me at smallbusinessoutfitters@gmail.com. And I'd like to encourage, if you haven't, like and follow Venture Call, Mike's Facebook page, and Small Business Outfitters. And again, that resource will be available. I'll make it available through the startup community group here and on Facebook, and then I'll put it back in the chat here in a minute. And that's all I have, Mike.
David, thank you very much. I'm going to unmute everybody so that we can have questions. Before I do, though, I just want to remind everybody, next Monday at 12:15, we will also have guest speakers. And so I hope that you can join us. Denise is going to talk to us, and Sarah from the bank, and probably one other speaker, talking on some issues that we were going to cover at the business clinic that we were supposed to have. And so hope you join us at 12:15 next week. Before y'all, wanted to let you know before you get off. So I'm going to unmute, and David will entertain questions. So just bring them forward. Oops.
Either I totally confused everybody, or it was so comprehensive that.
It was good, David. Great job.
Thank you.
Good job, David.
I have a quick question. This is Toby on the line.
Yes.
I enjoyed the presentation a whole lot. And thinking about the debt aspect, when we look at the leveraging of debt, would your recommendation be different for a company that can get debt at 0%? Looking at the case of Warren Buffett and how he's been able to raise funds in both Europe as well as Japan, that is zero interest. Would you still recommend a company, A, not to take the debt if that is available, and B, what other recommendation will you give in that case? You still have a stockpile, but you're still leveraging the debt. How do you balance both?
Well, I think debt leveraging is okay. Especially, again, the principle that I operate from and that I subscribe to is that I have a plan, that I know how I'm going to pay back that debt. So if I have, if I know that I'm going to be able to sell so much product or open into a new market or something like that, and based on my projection models and everything, I know what my timeline is to repay that debt. Absolutely, if it's 0%, I mean, I wouldn't at all shy away from that. In the case of even a bridge loan, if I am just short of cash and know for certainty that I'm going to get money back in because of some action I'm taking, and with a certain, a large amount of certainty, then I will, definitely take advantage of it. And that's, to me, the PPP plan is kind of what I like about it. I think I haven't looked as in depth to the economic disaster loan, only because it caps out at certain dollar amounts. And I think depending on the size of your business and the factor of your payroll, you actually can get more money with the PPP. And as long as you meet the criteria, and that's the only scary thing to me about that particular loan, it's 1% repayment if you don't meet the criteria. So even that's fairly risky. But if you don't get customers after the stay-at-home is lifted and you don't start getting oxygen to your business and making sales, then you've just dug yourself a deeper hole. Even at 1% or 0%, you've obligated yourself to somebody to have to pay it back. And so it's a factor to me more of the certainty that you have and the strategy you have that you're taking out the debt and what you're going to use it for and how you're going to pay it back. And so I think that's my caution and my concern is thinking that me borrowing money is going to solve my business problems and cash flow problems right now. It may not. If my business isn't healthy enough right now to even survive however long, and I think there's some question I'm waiting to hear, I think the city council spoke. That was mentioned at the beginning of our meeting by a few folks. Governor Abbott spoke just before noon here. And I think I'm still waiting to hear if they're going to really lift the stay-at-home by April 30th, because it makes a huge difference in our strategy at PCE and everything as to when that stay-at-home order is lifted. And so until we start having some certainty, I'll just explain it for us, is we're on an 80 to 90 day sales cycle on the equipment side. And so when the stay-at-home stuff is put in place, it completely stopped that. And in my mind, it stopped our sales cycle. So for us to get the stay-at-home lifted and the way it's trickled down is our salesmen can't go into body shops. They can't go call on customers. They don't want to see them. It's made it very difficult for us to reach out and talk to people, and they just don't want to spend money right now because of the uncertainty. And so it's the psychology right now that's playing into the uncertainty of what should we be doing. And so to me personally, going and borrowing money, you should have a certain amount of certainty that you go do that with before you take it on, even at 0%. But if I had that certainty in place and I had a strategy and I knew how I was going to repay it, I mean, that's the thing about the PPP loan that I never would have imagined this would be the case, but no collateral and no personal guarantee. And I mean, Ken Bowles is on. I see that. I can't imagine. I don't know how that sets well with bankers other than the government's backing that money. And that would be the only reason I would imagine bankers are okay with it. But otherwise, I never knew a banker in my life that would let you not have collateral. So
yeah, it's a unique situation, to be honest. And quite frankly, the banks are still working with the government to figure out the mechanics of getting that repaid and all the stuff on the back end, because the banks are really leveraging up their balance sheet by taking on these very low interest loans, and so there's going to have to be some regulatory relief on the banks as well, from a capital standpoint, from like I said, if some of these situations, if the government doesn't pay off those in full, then the banks are left with a part of that loan that's a long-term loan, and just how to handle that going forward for the banks, because that's a much longer-term situation. The risk for the banks really is that the borrowers don't use the proceeds properly. And so trying to control how that money gets spent is going to be pretty important for the customer and for the bank.
Well, and I'd throw out there that from a bookkeeping standpoint, I think it's extremely wise to set up a general ledger account and call it COVID-19. And any expenses you have, you might set up a couple of accounts even around this idea. If you've taken out a PPP loan, then that's what you want to have, even maybe a bank account that because and particularly if you did it because you're going to get it forgiven is your mentality, then you want a bank account, to me, that you're running all of the things that are forgivable through it. And the utilities, rent, and all that is part of it, but it's only up to 25%. So there's a lot of pieces to that particular loan that you just really have to have your head around before you just jump into it. So did that answer the original question though about zero?
Yes, it did.
Okay.
I actually have a follow-up question if it's possible. So I love the how you took Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and I just want to make either a comment or suggestion, but I hope you don't take it the wrong way. I was looking at your ordering of the profit versus order and the wording to it, and in my own opinion, I was thinking the profit might be the aspect of creating efficiency, because if you create efficiency, you lower your cost and then you make your profit. Whereas in the case of the order is where you might have stability that comes into play. And I probably would rank the order at the second level and the profit at the third level, as well as changing the labeling. But again, that's just from me looking at it from the outside versus from inside your business and how that might affect you. But if you're looking at it, how others might interpret it, I'm just making that as a suggestion. Maybe you could take a second look at
Well,
the.
I don't have intellectual rights to change that, or I would take that in consideration. It's from Mike Michalowicz's. He just released a book called Fix This Next, and that's his pyramid or hierarchy and parallels that he drew. I would guess, having gone through the program and kind of gotten trained on it, it also harkens back to last month when I presented to about profit first. And it's shifting the paradigm from the gap accounting mentality that you take your sales and minus your expenses, and then whatever's left over, if there's anything left over, is, hey, yay, we've got some profit. It's shifting that whole mindset to profit should be, there's primacy in the emphasis that you put on what comes first. So the metaphor of exercising, you get up, if you don't exercise first thing in the morning, it's proven that most people don't end up doing it later in the day as much. So that's where, I think probably the reason he ranked them like that is because you do want to put emphasis on being profitable. Even in crisis, you want to make it an emphasis on it. If you've had to lay off all your employees, and you're stuck just trying to keep the business going and making cash flow or doing whatever you have to do, then order probably is going to go out the window, but you want to keep profitability in place. That, I'm just guessing that's probably how he would explain why it, profits put just above sales.
Okay, thank you.
Uh-huh. I mean, I would be curious if anyone, is willing to share kind of what they've seen, Trenton, around the business services sector. I mean, what are you guys seeing as far as, what's the morale out there and attitude, I guess?
Well, it seems to be at one extreme or the other, that people are either going, this is gonna go on for forever, and I don't think I'm gonna make it, or people are pretty optimistic about it, kind of like you expressed, going, hey, at some point things have to pick back up here, and this isn't gonna last too long. It seems like from our clients and from our customers, there's really not much in between that we're hearing from them.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Good deal.
I was reading an article this morning because I have 3 millennial children about how screwed the millennials are by this event on the heels of the Great Recession, and how they were just entering their careers in the Great Recession, and now they're getting a double whammy. And I have a son that I mentioned at the beginning of this thing today that was furloughed the week before last, and his attitude is just totally negative. And he feels put upon because he graduated in 2006 from college, and and then it took a while to get a job, and then he got a job, and then that ended, and then he got another job, and that ended, and now he's been furloughed from a very well-paying job in Denver. So I think it depends on your perspective as to your attitude, not just as a business owner, but just as an employee, to recognize that while at my age, so far it hasn't been that big a deal, at my children's age, it's a really big deal.
Well, and it's the other thought I've had along the way is just, entrepreneurs, part of the DNA of being an entrepreneur is you solve problems. And so when you're thrown a curveball or thrown a crisis like this, it's almost a challenge to figure out how to navigate out of it. But there's, you know, the other side of the population, and we need that balance. Not everybody can be an entrepreneur, or we wouldn't have employees to to help, you know, work our businesses. And so there is, I mean, I think that's also, you know, leadership's important right now. If you're in those roles in that position, and just, you know, providing the encouragement and the help and the support and employee engagement where you can. The other side of it is I'm curious what's going to, you know, how this is going to prompt people to pursue more entrepreneurial opportunities, because of the path of employment is a tough one, especially in these situations. You have no guarantees. And that's kind of the thing about being an entrepreneur. When you do that, you have no guarantees from the get-go. So you're actually comfortable in that, to where I think employees aren't. That consistency and predictability of the job, when they don't have that, is when the anxiety and the frustration hits them. And I think that's, you know, that's where leadership of an entrepreneur has to kick in. But
If I may just add, not really related to the conversation for today, but trying to even assess the impact of the COVID-19 when it comes to balancing work versus family. I just read, like, this morning, that a judge in Florida granted temporary injunction to the ex-husband because the wife, the mother, is a doctor, and so the daughter now is living with the father. And so those are rippling effects that businesses also have to start considering, that because I'm in a specific industry, now I'm losing the relationship that I may have with my kids. And how do I balance even the role of a doctor or an entrepreneur or other areas with the health factor, with family, and even with the finances, which adds to the layer of difficulties or complexities that each person then has to deal with.
well, and it makes me think of your comments there. You know, my wife's a second grade school teacher, and we hear a range of reactions to what's going on. And the sad truth of it is the kids in her class that were doing okay before this are still doing okay, and they're getting the attention at home to keep their work going and all of that. The kids that were struggling in her class before this happened are off the radar, you know. And it's a larger issue, and not to open up that whole can of worms, but that is, you know, I think we don't know the complete fallout for probably months or maybe years. And, you know, like Paul said with his son and the generation, how it impacts different generations because of the ripple effect of it, you know, just parents and single parents and just different circumstances. Because they're dealing, you know, you've got some of these families with who my wife teaches, and, you know, and I don't know, but if they're laid off or anything like that, then, you know, that's going to impact their kids and the trajectory they've been on to this point. So there's no doubt it is a crisis, and it's not to make light of the pain and the struggles that people are having. But you know, from where I sit and where I come from in a belief and a values place, is that this is all temporary, and any pain or suffering that we have is you've got to approach it as it's not going to last forever, and there's light at the end of the tunnel. So, and it helps to have community that can encourage you and support you. So thank you, Mike.
Yeah. You know, this has been great, David. And I wanted to mention that, I don't know whether some of you saw a little while ago, there was a lady on here by the name of Maureen, and she popped off a few minutes ago. But Maureen is my sister in Cody, Wyoming, and she owns a small home health business up there. And so, you know, she gets the award for being the farthest away to join us today. Though Trenton looks like he's in Boston or somewhere, but anyway, I know she's really in Cody. So, with a forum like this, I think is really cool. I mean, of course, all of us are local people, pretty much. Garrick's over in Dallas mostly, but this is something I think of great benefit that, you could invite your friends from across the country to jump in on and be able to listen as well. And so, as I mentioned, we're going to have 3 speakers next week, starting at 12:15. And they're going to be talking about different issues of how hospitality helps grow your business and and how it interfaces with your employees, with your vendors, and with your customers. And so I hope you guys will keep that in mind and join us. And they're going to give, I think, 3 10-minute talks, and it's going to give us time to be able to consort and talk about the impact of that. So I hope all of you kind of put it on your calendar. We're going to try to, and then on the 27th, I've got Dr. Michael Fortunato is going to be joining us. He's out of Huntsville, and he does a lot of community development with entrepreneurs and smaller communities and that kind of stuff. And so I think he's going to have some really good things to share with us too. So it looks like that while we're in this mode, I'm going to try to, have guest speakers like what David did and what Brian Bloom did last week, just kind of on a weekly basis, and to give us a half hour or 40 minutes worth of, content, and then we can talk about it. So I sure appreciate everybody showing up, and God willing, we'll see you guys next week. So thanks.
Mike?
Yeah.
Yeah, I was just going to say, when the PPP program came out initially, it was that first week, it was pretty much for companies that had, small, under 500 employees and had W-2 employees. That's what that was really geared towards. They have since, as of at the end of last week, they're opening that up to a broader spectrum of people, and so contractors who weren't employees of companies but get their income 1099 and stuff like that. They're opening it up for those companies, those individuals, small entities, and so there'll be more information about that coming out relatively quickly, but it's going to broaden the number of companies or people that can qualify for that program. And then also we had initially we were going to take care of our customers first, because there's a set kind of dollar amount that most of these banks are willing to put on their books or even allowed to put on their books. At the end of last week, we've decided to, on a case-by-case basis, look at non-customers who would become new customers. So that door's opened up somewhat for us. We've come across some institutions. I've talked to a few bankers and some institutions that either they're not doing these loans, and so their customers are going other places looking for them, or they weren't. They didn't have the SBA qualifications or abilities to actually work with the SBA through the SBA's own. They have their own system called eTran that you work through, working on these on any type of loan application with the SBA. And I talked to one of my best friends out of high school that works for a bank, community bank near Fort Worth, and they've got all these applications in from their customers, but they can't process them because they don't even have connectivity to the SBA. And so there's a lot of demand out there for these. I mean, we probably did at the end of last week, and that was really from like probably Tuesday to Thursday, we probably processed 20 million in loans, had another 160 million in the pipeline, and that was just in two or 3 days, really. And so there's a ton of that activity going on. And anytime you people are putting on debt, you obviously you have to have a strategy to get out of it. And obviously with this program, which is it's very unique. I've never seen anything quite like this either, where the government's stepping in and they're trying to keep people on payrolls. There's a definitive way to get out. It's still a little gray, but we'll work through that. It's a Band-Aid until we can open the economy back up, because if we don't open it up, this was only for 2.5 months, the 8 weeks or whatever that was, 2.5 times your monthly payroll. Obviously that's not going to last into the summer, and so if we don't get it back open, then either, they're going to have to do something else, or they're going to have to take the, I guess, the risk that it's going to be more deadly to us if we can't work than it is for people to potentially get exposed if they go back to work. And so at some point, you kind of have to make that decision. And I'm hoping that decision gets made in May, or early May to mid-May, because there's, the longer you're out of work, the more people fall out of the workforce. They go somewhere else, they do something else. You can't get them back, and it's just some of that stuff you can't repair the longer it goes. So anyway, just FYI on that.
Yeah. Well, I really concur. When I was in workforce development at the Workforce Center, one of the things I saw was back then, sometimes they had unemployment insurance that lasted. Congress had passed some laws, and they could have unemployment insurance for nearly a year. And so people who had held jobs their entire lives, and professional people and so forth, they went on vacation. They once they adjusted their cost of living down, they went on vacation for a year. At the end of that time, they think, well, maybe I ought to get a job. But what I found working with them, it had become more difficult in many cases to work with those people than it did with like welfare clients and people like that, because they had adjusted themselves, and something happens internally, to motivation and those kinds of things. And so it's kind of a similar threat, I think, Ken, the longer it goes and somebody's out, and plus you combine that with somebody who has really put their whole heart and soul and assets into building a business, and then all of that's gone, trying to gear up and, get the assets and motivation to do it again. And that's why a lot of my concern is for especially the early stage and the startups and those kinds of folks, especially, but nobody's exempt. But anyway.
Yeah, it's across the board, and it's affecting, it doesn't really matter what your profession or income bracket is, because a lot of businesses that you wouldn't think would be hurting are really hurting. Yeah. And even the hospitals and, doctors, GPs, all that kind of stuff, all the elective stuff is gone.
Oh yeah.
All the income producing stuff for these hospitals is gone.
I know.
And so they are really suffering right now. And just one other thing, I was just going to follow up on what Paul said too, because I had thought about this. I really hadn't talked to my daughters, but I have 2 daughters who are both millennials, and one was in high school and one was already in college back in the last financial crisis. And I remember talking them through that process back then. And we were in Atlanta at the time, which was just, decimated. Different parts of the country were affected differently. Texas actually was lightly affected compared to other parts of the country, and that one. And the reverse was true back in the 80s. Texas and the Southwest were just hammered, and other parts of the country may or may not have been equally as negatively affected. But I thought about that, that generation has really taken two big hits in a relatively short amount of time. And that definitely does affect your outlook and what you want to do, what you think you want to do, just it's that generation's, had some, they've gotten hit a couple times. So anyway.
Yeah, exactly. Was anybody else got anything you want to add? Where people are slipping away, and that's great. That's fine. Kind of gear it from about 12:15 to 1. Of course, I can stay on all afternoon. You guys can do. Some of you probably could too, but others of you got something more profitable to do. So I want to thank you again for coming on. And David, thank you. That was excellent, man. Very good. And thanks for all the preparation you put into it too. So we'll be looking for good things from you, Denise, next week. Okay. She's going to remain silent. Okay. She's ignoring.
She may be driving.
She might be. She was driving a while ago. So yeah. Anyway, so thanks a lot, you guys. I guess we'll close out and hope to see you next week. Some of you anyway.
All right. Thanks, Mike.
Okay.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks.
Thank you. Bye.
Sure. Bye-bye.
All right, Mike, thanks for having us and everything. Yeah, I would definitely like to talk to Maureen sometime about their home health business.
Oh, okay.
It's interesting that she was on because David and I have had a talk about that recently.
I'll tell you what. I'll text you her contact information, and I'll give you an online introduction to her.
Yeah, that'd be awesome.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
I'll be glad to do it. Okay. Thanks.
All right.